So thank you very much for coming here on your lunch break to listen to me banter about the nerdiest of topics. Relevant, as you say, but still incredibly nerdy and never. So what I'll be talking about today is pretty much this idea of what has happened, right? We saw this in the US in 2016, we saw this in the Brexit vote, France, Sweden, Germany, all over the place. And it's actually, we know now it's starting to spread. We have evidence to suggest that this has happened at least to 20 different countries in the past 2 years, including Mexico, Brazil, which we believe is actually happening right now, and another number of other countries. So this is not a US, European, or Westphalian even centric thing that's going on. But I think, as I'll kind of get through in my lecture, is I think really the Westphalian, particularly the European model of how they're trying to tackle this, is the best way to move forward. So this all brings back to where I kind of rest in my general area of research is persuasion, right? How do we persuade you to do something, right? And this all starts off with propaganda. So pretty much the best propagandists we've seen on the face of the earth have pretty much to date been Europeans, and once the US got started, Americans as well. The idea originally comes from the Catholic Church, so this is actually a very old idea, right? So Congregato de Propaganda Fide in 1622 got started basically, how can we spread the Catholic faith, right? This was part of the Counter-Reformation. How can we convince people that they should be Catholic and not Protestant? And so the word eventually falls off, and then we show up again somewhere around the beginning of the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, right? With the radio, right? Guglielmo Marconi develops the radio, and all of a sudden we have mass communication, right? We had the telegraph before, but that was still pretty much one person to one person, the sender and the receiver. But now we have the radio, this mass communication device where one person can speak to lots of people and try and convince them of something. So all of a sudden, right around the beginning of the 20th century, right around i.e. World War I, we start to see the resurgence of this idea of propaganda. How can we propagandize people? Pretty much through World War I, we see the British and the Americans are the most prominent and then using it during the war. And then as everyone really knows from World War II, really the Nazis and the Americans and how we use propaganda. Interestingly, it has developed a international, different connotations across the globe, right? So in the U.S., it's still very much a pejorative term, right? You say propaganda in the U.S., that's a dirty word in politics. You know, you stay away. No money's ever going to politics. No money in politics is ever going to propaganda efforts. That doesn't mean we don't do them whatsoever, but we just rebrand, right? It's all a PR thing. It's how you brand things. But really, what is propaganda? The mass suggestion or influence through manipulation of symbols and the psychology of the individual. Important key difference here is manipulation of psychology. So what we see most often in propaganda content are very emotional type appeals, right? So when you're appealing to someone's emotion, you're going for an argument about immigration, right? About how these immigrants don't belong here because they're going to harm your family. You know, they're criminals who are going to kill you. Not trying to sound like anyone we've heard recently, but these are messages we've heard, for hundreds of years already in these kind of areas. Now, where I come in, my research is in this idea of public diplomacy. So what is public diplomacy? Basically, it's the rebranded form of propaganda. So this arose in 1965. So former U.S. Ambassador Edmund Gullion basically said, hey, we do this propaganda thing. It's the 1950s and 60s. It's no longer okay for us to call it this because, hey, World War II and the Nazis were about 20 years ago. People still remember. And pretty much he's like, we're never going to get funding for this in Congress. So what do? We rebrand. We call it public diplomacy. How do we engage with the public? It's diplomacy that engages the public, right? So instead of our traditional diplomacy models, diplomats, now we have diplomats to the public. So the idea was, how do world leaders, how do embassies, consulates, ambassadors, how do they engage with foreign audiences? How can they be functions of improving or furthering foreign policy interests by engaging with audiences and foreign publics? This is mostly what we understand of in what took place in the Cold War, right, between the US and the Soviet Union. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, RT, Russia Today on their side, which has gone through different names. There's Radio Sputnik, there's RT, I have lots of different names, but I am not exactly a Russia specialist in this era, in that era. But so what is it? It's a play on words, but it's moderately different interests and goals than propaganda, but still the outcome is the same. You're convincing people of something that they otherwise would not have convinced themselves to do. Strategic communication with the dissemination of an information to the general public of foreign nations to establish a dialogue. And very important part, public diplomacy as a function of PR says, hey, we should have a dialogue, right? I'm not talking to you or at you, I'm talking with you. So it should be two-way communication ideally, but it's still designed to inform and influence. And so we still kind of get back to the idea of propaganda, right? We're still trying to convince someone. In the original term from the Catholic Church, it was propaganda de fide was actually evangelization of the faith, right? Evangelization of the people to the Catholic faith. So really, we're just trying to spread our ideas and convince people why they should like what we think. Now, cue in Obama administration. Everyone knows he got elected on this huge, campaign of change. He gets into office, and all of a sudden, Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State. And then we have this new policy initiative for the digitization of foreign policy, right? The digitization of how we engage people across the globe, right? You want a key idea in public relations. When you want to engage with your public, you have to be where your public is, right? Starting 2008 on, that's social media. You have to be on social media platforms to engage with these people. And the State Department had the same premise. You look at Twitter. It's actually very interesting when you track primary platforms across continents, so Facebook in Europe or Twitter in Africa or different areas. But you have to be where they are. And so all of a sudden we have this idea that we can use digital platforms and their strategic functions to engage in foreign policy, persuade people why they should like Americans or pick whatever country is engaging in this. Interestingly, the kind of leaders in this area right now are these three people at the Digital Diplomacy Research Group at the University of Oxford. We have Cornelia Bajola, Jennifer Cassidy, and Elon Manner. They're really, actually this was the group my class was for to travel and work with them. If this interests you, this is actually hyperlinked. I don't know if this PowerPoint will go out, but if it is, this is hyperlinked, kind of just some more information about digital diplomacy. But this is really a policy initiative that's taken around the globe, right? We've seen the effectiveness of hard military force is starting to wane in the eyes of global public opinion, so we have to figure out other ways to try and convince people to do things, right? We're relying less and less on tanks and more on other means. This is basically how, as a national security concern, the US government said we need to start moving forward. Well, this is an extension of public diplomacy, right? It's supposed to be above board, right? Well, all of a sudden in 2016, we see social media accounts coming from what we believe to be foreign countries, trying to influence elections in less constructive ways. How is that exactly different from digital diplomacy, right? Well, there are many ideas about how it's different, but then basically we spawn this new word, computational propaganda. So how are we engaging in propaganda, but using the telecommunication infrastructure, the computational elements, to make it different from digital diplomacy or from traditional diplomacy? One thing we see, where I'm working out with my dissertation research, is we see in the 20th century a continuous and very intense debate between what is the difference between propaganda and public diplomacy, which I told you is hard to figure out in its own right. Well, now what I'm trying to figure out is what's the difference between computational propaganda and digital diplomacy. And it's even more complex because they're using the exact same elements of telecommunication infrastructure to achieve their ends, right? So it's immensely just a rabbit hole that I willingly threw myself down. So this guy is Phil Howard. He runs the computational research project at the University of Oxford. If anyone is interested in this particularly, this is was his inaugural lecture at Oxford. Basically, where he sets out his next 10 years, 20 years worth of research ideas. This is an amazing speech. It's about a 45-minute lecture. It's amazing if anyone is interested in this. Again, if this gets out, that is hyperlinked for you to follow through. So what I'm looking at is basically, what is computational propaganda? How is it used? What we know, 2016, US, Brexit, France, Germany, Sweden, all these different countries. We know now that they're mostly coming out of Russia, right? So one thing that's very difficult about the internet and cybersecurity is it's very hard to track who's doing things, right? To know exactly who's doing what. We believe they are coming from 13 Russians in the Internet Research Institute in St. Petersburg. We believe that the US intelligence community believes the Kremlin was linked to this, but we have no actual tangible evidence to say that it happened. This is actually a very dangerous road that we're going down in cybersecurity, is the use of proxies, right? So we're using proxy wars, we're using proxy agents in wars. So like, Russia will more than likely never actually engage in computational propaganda themselves, so the Russian state, because they're going to have non-state actors do it, right? They're going to find criminals, they're going to find terrorist groups who want to do it, give them the funding and the resources to be able to achieve it. So what do we know about 2016? Or what about the computational propaganda in Europe? So far, these are the countries that we have sufficient evidence to believe that a computational propaganda attack, whatever word you want to use on it, was engaged in, right? Interestingly, as I mentioned, we've seen it elsewhere. It's happening. We know it's happening in Mexico. We know it's happening in Brazil. I think one of the reasons why we see this most directly targeted Europe is not only the stability of Europe and geopolitical relation to Russia, but also they have the infrastructure for us to be able to track this the easiest, right? This could be going on in countries across Africa, across other parts of Asia, but their telecommunication infrastructure doesn't facilitate us being able to track it and figure it out that it's going on. So this very well could be happening just as much in Africa, South America, Asia. We don't really know yet, right? The only regions I believe we can really track this with a lot of prevalence is the US, Europe, and then China. Well, China wants their own model where they don't want to be a part of everyone else's internet, so we can't really know what's going on there. And then we're struggling in the US with our own policies on ideas of freedom of speech, another common law problem, about what is privacy, how much data goes out, and these different issues. So really, not only do we believe Europe right now is still the leading target for these attacks. But as I'll get into, I think their policies about what we see in data security and privacy are the ways forward to how we can really start to kind of combat this problem. And so what would this look like? There are two ways. When you're thinking about propaganda, there's two things you can try to hope to mitigate. The first is content, right? Well, let's target the content they're going at. And we see this, right? So we have they're currently drafting fake news laws both in France and the United Kingdom. I think they're more on the way, but these are kind of the ones who are leading the charge. And we know this primarily because of Brexit. They're also galvanized the most because of Brexit and then the Macron election. We also have hate speech laws, right? So we have Germany's DG law. These are ways that certain countries are moving forward, but it's all at the national level, right? It's not the international level. Interestingly, in terms of the internet, we have not had new international laws or agreements about the internet since 2001. Which is, for anyone who does anything with the internet, is like beyond ancient, right? This is talking ancient legislation. And why is this? Because it all comes down to freedom of expression. Any type of regulation or governance of the internet that has come up in the past 17 years has to involve some level of how much do we regulate content? How much do we allow people to say what they want to say? Well, in the international community, international politics and IR, we have the divide. We still have the Cold War divide, right? We have the Westphalian democracies who are pro-freedom of expression, and then we have our more authoritarian states who are pro-government censorship, right? So whether we're talking about Russia, China, Iran, whoever, anytime, whether we're talking the UN, any other international bodies as has come up, it always devolves right down to this issue of freedom of expression and censorship. And then basically, because these two sides are great powers and then they mobilize everyone else to be behind them, we have completely deadlocked each other out of any type of internet regulation for the past 20 years, 17 years. So these things can happen at the state level because there's less, basically, actors to get on board. But I don't think content is the way to go. Because in the end, it will always devolve into this issue of freedom of speech. And in the end, we will eventually see certain countries who believe in freedom of expression starting to trample on freedom of expression rights. In the US, you look at this with, it was the person Twitter took down, Alex Jones. So like, yes, we can all pretty much objectively agree that like his speech is, or his speech online is contrary to the common good and it is mostly artificial. But what happens when it's a lot greater? And 99% of the time in communication law, everything is in the dead center of grayness, and it's hard to figure things out. So these things are great now. There's enough interest now that you can get them through legislative bodies. But 5-10 years, I think eventually we're going to start to see problems where these things fall apart. And why? For a perfect example, what I think a problem where this regulating speech comes in, content, is the Holocaust law in Poland that we just had, right? So this new law in Poland says basically it's a crime against the Polish state to in any way suggest, accuse, or surmise that the Polish state was implicated or involved in the Nazi death camps, Holocaust camps in Poland, right? It's a good idea, but politics being politics, everyone politicizes history, and so basically this is the same idea of regulating hate speech. It's not exactly on the same par of hate speech as what we see in Germany.
It's not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
If you look at Polish history, it's not a good idea.
Exactly. And so, but this is the natural, I think, if these kind of laws are passed, I think eventually this is the kind of laws we see, right? We see more of these kind of Holocaust laws saying, you can't say this because that's contrary to what the state believes history was. Well, then we're back in the state, we're in state censorship, right? So what do I think? As a person in the telecom area, I'm all about infrastructure, right? Telecommunication infrastructure. Let's go after the way we disseminate the messages rather than the content of the messages themselves. So we look at this infrastructure model. The biggest thing that has facilitated computational propaganda is this idea of micro-targeting. Now what this means? This means on social media, if you're identified as maybe being left-leaning, and you are maybe identified as being right-leaning, you would see advertisements that were content that would say something about like, Blue Lives Matter and immigrants are cop killers. Whereas you would see something to the extent of, cops are agents of the state who are impacting state policy and killing all these migrants, right? The exact same issue, but you're seeing radically different content that is playing off of emotional cues, right? This goes back to the idea of propaganda, psychological manipulation. These are not rational arguments. So that is what this idea of micro-targeting is. To steal a play out of Phil Howard's book, The Computational Guy at Oxford, a quick example. How many people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people in this room. How many of you have a smartphone? Anybody know? Okay, everyone has a smartphone. The average smartphone has 23 apps on it. The average app sends one data ping every minute. So every one of us, every minute, are sending 23 different pieces of data information to whoever's collecting that information, right? So this is Google, this is Apple, this is all of your apps, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whoever, whatever all the news apps. So think about, in the 1 hour that we'll be here, 14 times 23 times 60, whatever that number is. It's a lot of data for a relatively small group of people in one room, right? But that's the kind of data that we can now build psychological profiles off of, right? So we know that these people in geosynchronous location are relative to each other, right? So we know, companies don't know how we're all linked together, but they know in some way that we're linked together. And then they can start to look in our profiles and realize, oh hey, everyone from their other data, they all have interest in Europe, right? Whether they're from Europe, or they Google things about Europe, or they write papers about things that happen in Europe. So then they can start to build these behavioral profiles off of us, right? Things that we're interested in, behaviors that were inferential statistics, things that we're likely to think or do. So this is the entire idea of micro-targeting. It comes out of business models, and that's actually one of the most interesting things I found in my dissertation so far. Everything that we've seen in the past 2 years, none of it's actually illegal because it's all good business, right? This all comes out of a capitalistic model of, hey, we want to serve our customers better, we need to know what our customers are probably going to want to buy, and so this all comes out of the idea of good business, right? Companies want to give us the products more fastly that we want. Now, this is a complete perversion of that idea, but this is actually not a problem legally very much until you get into the political sector of manipulating elections. So what are micro-targeting is a function of data, right? So the data that you give, and then also algorithms. So the algorithms that allow for the creation of these behavioral profiles, but also the algorithms that govern how data is distributed, right? So why you get this message versus you get this message versus everyone else in this room. And so what I think we need to look at is figure out tech ways to basically try and fill these holes, right? Try and stop the diffusion of these messages. Don't worry about the content. You're always going to have your crazies who have their conspiracy theories or whatever you have, but don't worry about the content because it's going to lead to larger issues. Target the infrastructure. So I believe the 3 areas we need to look at are bot network tracking. So we have bots who disseminate this information. We need to be able to track these bot networks, increase data security, and then algorithm transparency. And so why do I think Europe is the leading way on this? Well, the last piece of international legislation we did have on the internet, all the way back in 2001, was the Budapest Convention on cybercrime. This was drafted by the EU Council, originally for the EU, but then right after 9/11, all of a sudden national security and cybersecurity and all these issues are at the forefront. So all of a sudden all these Westphalian democracies are following the US to sign on. US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, I think Japan signed on as well. And all of a sudden this becomes a piece of international law because it has the force of multiple countries around the world, or a sufficient number of countries around the world. Now, as I mentioned, 2001, this is ancient, right? This is ancient in terms of modern internet. But I think some ways that it is useful is the idea of capacity building. One of the core ideas of the Budapest Convention in tracking cybercrime, back in 2001, they only thought of non-state actors doing cybercrime. So is this criminal going to hack your email in Russia? Is he going to hack your email in Brazil, right? So how can the Brazilian government and the Russian government share information that we have that person be caught or stopped, right? And so there was the idea that we need to have international cooperation around the sharing of this information, but also they went on to other levels of harmonizing national legislation. That's a horrible idea in the international community. Countries never want to have laws like others, for the most part. Other levels, but they did push this agenda of we need to be able to share information across international borders better. And where I think we need to get in terms of this is use this model in terms of bot network tracking. So one thing that the Computational Research Project has found is that not all, but a sizable chunk of these bots that are diffusing all this kind of content are actually migrating from issue to issue. The one Phil Howard talks about most often was posting content all about Israel's presence in Palestine. And then in 2016, all of a sudden, one day it becomes an expert on the referendum. And then after the vote, all of a sudden it becomes an expert on the US election. And then after the election, all of a sudden it becomes an expert in French elections, German elections, Swedish elections, you name it. So a chunk of these bots are actually migrating from issue to issue. And so what do we need to do? We need to track these across international borders. So that's one way I think the Budapest Convention, pieces of it can be used in kind of moving forward. So what's the other part of micro-targeting? One of the other parts, data security, right? If anyone, for all people interested in the EU, most people know about the GDPR. Everyone probably knows about the GDPR. I was actually in Europe at the time that it took effect, and oh my God, it made my life so miserable. Updating all my security, it was a hassle to get started. But in the end, I think it actually will be good legislation. It's good ideas moving forward. And so what are some of the key pieces of the GDPR? Increased territorial scope. So basically this means EU privacy laws only apply to people in the continent of Europe. Well, now it's anyone who wants to do business with a European, right? So whether that European is in the US, Asia, Africa, whatever, they have to abide by EU laws. Increased penalties, increased ideas about consent, breach notification. So if your data is ever violated, they have to let you know within, I think, 24 to 48 hours, which, fun fact, there was no limit, so they could inform you a year later before the GDPR when your data was violated. Right to access, so basically every user has a right to check with any person at that time and say, hey, I want to know exactly where my data is, exactly what you're doing with it, these different ideas. Right to be forgotten, something that doesn't really apply in the US in terms of US communication law, but something that's very popular in Europe. Data portability. One of the most interesting things that came out of this was this idea of data portability. So if you think about a business transaction, if I go to you and I want to do business, I give you, say, my briefcase of all my data, and as long as we're doing business, you're holding on to that briefcase for me. But if for any reason I decide I don't like you, I decide I want to do my business elsewhere, I can go pick up my briefcase and take it with me. So basically, you can take your data from people. If I get off Facebook, they then have to give me all my data back, right? That doesn't exist in the US model. When someone has your data, they have access to it for life, right? So this is one of the new ideas. But where I really am interested in is the idea of privacy by design. So basically the GDPR is suggesting, or is trying to force a number of these data companies that they have to redesign, not their entire infrastructure, but sizable portions of their infrastructure to be more conducive to privacy issues, right? To users being able to control their own privacy. Which is again something we don't have in the US, much less many other places in the world. And so I'll get in a minute exactly back to where I think we can go with that. And then data protection offers is basically when your data was violated, people didn't know who to go to, right? Like, who do I file a claim with? Who do I make a complaint to? Well, now there's specific kind of point people you can reach out to. So what do I think moving forward? Where are we really looking at this? There have been calls for some sort of Geneva Convention about this moving forward, right? And this isn't this kind of persuasion information operations only. We're talking about the DNC hack. We're talking about hacking Macron's emails. This is a much larger issue in cybersecurity. I'm only talking one piece. So there have been lots of calls for either a digital Geneva Convention or a Geneva Convention on cyberspace, basically saying we need to set out a new framework of rules, right? And again, it's going to be very difficult because, like I said, 17 years, it's not easy to get most of the great powers and most of the countries on board with this. But we need something because now we're seeing enough violations that people are interested enough to sit at the table and be willing to at least listen. And so 3 areas that I think we need to make part of this. The first is multi-stakeholder cooperation for capacity building and bot network tracking. Basically, this means the countries who know how to do social network analyses, identify and track these, need to share that information and train other countries on how to better do it. So in the US, we need to send people from, whether we're talking NSA, CIA, Facebook, whatever, we need to have them working with other people in South America, Africa, to train them how to detect and track these bot networks. But also the capacity for sharing that information across borders. So if you're in, say Europe or Italy, and we identify certain bots, but then all of a sudden we see them moving to a French election, well, there should be some kind of capacity for we need to share that information with French authorities, right? Or pick whatever country. So that's one where I think the Budapest Convention is really going to come in handy, is using that framework for international cooperation about information sharing and capacity building. Interestingly, it also needs to be across not only national borders, but across industry borders, right? So these issues are not specific to any one person, which is another issue with cybersecurity. Not only do we have to worry about getting some odd number of 200 countries, but we have to get some odd number of powerful corporate actors, right? So whether they're NGOs such as the Global Commission on Stability for Cyberspace or the East-West Institute, corporations like Facebook, Google, Twitter. Fun fact, Google still doesn't share any of their information with the public about what we know from 2016. They are doing just enough to basically look good in a PR sense, going back to my PR background. They're basically saying, hey, we know what we're doing, here's some information, but they're still not sharing most of the data that they have. This might be going on at a higher up level, secret things with the CIA or NSA or Homeland or someone, but on the whole, they're still very closed off. Most of these data aggregators are, whether Google, Apple, Twitter, Facebook. And then academia. We actually have, since 2016, a number of people who are really delving into this issue, trying to merge computer science technology with the social science study of this area. So the Berkman Klein and Belfer Centers at Harvard, the Oxford Internet Institute, where we have a computational propaganda research project. They're not working with governments right now. They're not working with Silicon Valley and the tech industry. Why do we have all these people doing all these different things, but no one's working together? So I think, again, this is where, when we have this kind of discussion, it doesn't need to be governments only, right? We need non-state actor stakeholders involved in this kind of conversation. We need to increase avenues for data security, and specifically what I was mentioning back to privacy by design. I have recently gotten involved with some computer science people, which has blown my mind because I'm a total social science person, and these STEM people are way over my head. But some avenues that they have for is we need to have increased avenues for privacy on the part of the data aggregator, so the people collecting and selling this data, the Facebooks, Googles, and Twitters, by something called synthetic data. So basically, synthetic data, if you think about what happened with Cambridge Analytica, we have this huge data set on 50 million to 100 million users that they sold over to Cambridge Analytica. Synthetic data is basically saying we're going to give you that exact same data set, but basically we're going to wash it down to where all of the individual person properties are no longer there, but all of the main statistical relationships are still there. So these outside companies still have an interest in the data because they can they can infer certain things about how society is working, certain topics that are of interest or whatever. It's still usable data for them, but all of those smaller level of microbits of data that identify you with being one way and you being another way, those are washed out. So we use synthetic data via a process called differential privacy. But if you remember, the GDPR is about giving control of their privacy to the user. So another thing I'm interested in trying to probe more is the idea of giving increased data privacy to users, or access over their privacy settings to users. So one way we have this is called sanitized data. So not necessarily synthetic, but sanitized data. So this, a good example of this is if I'm traveling and I'm in Prague and I need a place to eat, and I get on my iPhone and I'm looking at Apple Maps and I want, give me a restaurant, give me restaurants within 5 minutes walking distance from me. Apple knows that I'm exactly in Prague. They know exactly which street I'm on. They know exactly what food I'm likely to go eat. Sanitized data is basically saying options for, hey, right now I'm in Prague, Rome, Paris, London, and Stockholm, and give me food options for all of these. And then on the user end, on their phone, they can filter out what options they want. And then the company doesn't know where they're filtering. So basically, you're still getting the same quality of customer service to the end user, but you're clouding that data. It's more cloudy, and they don't know exactly what city you're in, right? So it clouds that data some bit. So I think there are avenues for increased privacy, both on the part of the data aggregators, again, what data they're collecting, how they're giving it out, but also on the average user. You can be controllers of your own privacy. And then, lastly, algorithm transparency. Algorithms are the biggest, darkest secrets of all of these groups. Why? They are proprietary information. They are patented, right? Whether it's the World Intellectual Property Organization or the US Patent Office, this is literally where Google makes all of its money from, is this simple algorithm that governs its system, right? They don't want people knowing exactly how it works, because then people can corner the market and then make it unusable, really. But as I mentioned earlier, the thing I've come back to so many times with these interviews I've been doing is everyone saying, this is our business model, right? Facebook is not interested in most of their own user-generated profit. They're interested in the data profit, right? The data they collect on you and how much they're selling that to advertisers for. It's really a capitalistic model that has facilitated this, and then other people have come in and just manipulated it for their own uses. So really, we need to rethink about algorithms and how we can make them more transparent. Now, full transparency is not good, right? That's going to hurt these companies. That's going to hurt the process. But I think there's some level when you look at, again, the World Trade Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, there has to be some greater level of openness about these algorithms. So maybe not the full public needs to know, but some sort of advisory council, some sort of evaluation committee in these groups need to have a higher understanding of that. So I think all three of these are ways that we can really try and tackle this problem moving forward. It's not going to be easy. People talk about the digital Geneva Convention. That's probably a minimum 10 years down the road if that even happens. But there are lots of different ways people are looking for it. Some are doing content. I think infrastructure is right. As I was just talking before this lecture, some people are going for credibility and information kind of literacy. So the idea that we need to train people better how to evaluate this information. Don't worry about the content or how it's being disseminated. Train people better, right? That involves much larger societal conversations about how we're, primary education, how people are learning this information. That may be a fruition somewhere down the road, but I think that's way more like 50 plus, years down the road at an international level again. So this is what I had. Thank you so much for your time. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Would also like to mention, not only do I have the support of my own college, but I also received a dissertation grant from the University USC Center for Public Diplomacy, so nice shout out to them for helping me fund all this research. Thank you so much.
Thanks
thanks a lot for this interesting lecture. It was something very different from what I'm doing, and very exciting. I was wondering, sorry if my question will be a bit stupid, because maybe something obvious. So you were talking about this computational propaganda, and I had this feeling that you kind of give the right or the agency for this computational propaganda to, maybe because you're coming also from a bit from IR field, like, you know, you like have this state, and then you have this Russia also as a state, and also a bit, to me it sounded a bit demonized. I mean, I'm Ukrainian, I'd love to demonize Russia, but still like, and then you give these recommendations which could be helpful, you know, to cope with this, but to me, this computational propaganda, or let's say computational interference into public opinion, is something that is actually very interesting to a lot of interest groups, right? So, and even the state is not, I mean, I don't see the state from my like academic point of view as a, you know, something is a black box, so for me it's a lot of factors too. So do you really think that this could be adopted and followed? Because there are so many actors everywhere that would be interested, like even behind each political party, who would be interested in doing this computational thing, because, well, that's...
Well, they already do
nice
it, and that's the thing. It's just not, it's not deemed computational propaganda, right? So we know, and this goes back to the business markets, we know political advertising, right? Right now, every time I get on my Hulu, I get Rick Scott ads, you know, like it's, everyone pays these computational systems. They pay for advertising to get certain content in front of certain people's eyes. The reason it's an issue, and one thing I go about in the political comp side is, you know, when we talk about persuasive political communication, no one cares when Americans are trying to screw over other Americans, right? Or Brits, you know, don't like. But all of a sudden, we care a whole lot when it's Russians trying to, you know, screw over our political system. So that's where I think the emphasis will come from. This is people will care enough when we start throwing state names. You know, we start state and national associations. That's when all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, this is happening. Like this is a thing. This is real. This is, other than like, you know, being the whole micro-targeting, this has been going on in the US for, you know, this has been going on in Europe. Like this is, the ideas aren't new, it's the technology that's making it happen in a new way, right? The issue itself is not old. Now, I definitely think you're right in terms of there are interest groups who want to do that, who are using this, there are nonprofits. I actually did a paper a couple years ago about basically using social media hashtag virality as a so how viral certain hashtags go as a mechanism for trying to do this, right? And so the idea being, my recommendations, though they involve state actors, the idea, if ever they're implemented, is across the board. This will affect everyone, right? So it's changing the operation of the system, right? So if ever these were sort of implemented, this would be make it a lot harder for anyone to do this, right? So if these things were, if we were tracking these bot networks, if we were in terms of how we increase this data security, these algorithm transparency, this would make it harder for everyone to use this and target this kind of data. So the idea is, we're not trying to stop other state actors from doing it. We're trying to stop this from happening altogether. So it doesn't matter the actor who's trying to engage in it. Now, that does not make me very popular in the State Department, because digital diplomacy is a policy right now, and actually Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty just got caught 3 months ago. They bought Facebook advertisements that were directed at people inside the United States. Well, in the US system, that's a violation of the Smith-Munn Act. Basically, we can't propagandize our own people. There's its own internal issues there. But again, no one thought about this as being a problem, other than that it violated this US law. But it always boiled back down to freedom of speech, right? Because then all the US, all the Westphalian democracies are like, no, anytime you want to throw information, this is getting into government censorship, and you just want to censor people. And so it shouldn't have really been that big of a surprise. Now, getting back to the whole demonizing thing, again, just because of the whole buzz, the news cycle, PR, everything, everyone thinks this is Russia right now. We don't have enough evidence to say other people have done it. And I don't think that doesn't mean it's not there. We just haven't uncovered it yet. Interestingly, something I have discovered is that the Americans actually did this first, right? This whole computational propaganda thing, we actually did this to ISIS, right? So when we're trying to combat ISIS on Facebook and how they're trying to recruit people, we actually did this. The Department of Defense did this. They bought Facebook advertisements with certain content, and they micro-targeted certain people in, you know, Iraq, Syria, whoever, before Syria came to be on a computer, you know, the Facebook access. But you know, the people who had access to this is how the US combated ISIS in, you know, 2013 through 2015. So really, you know, right now everyone's saying it's Russia. The evidence for the instances that we've seen has suggested Russia, but it could be anyone, right? So You're right. It's unfairly demonizing Russia. I think there was some involvement, but they're not by far the only actor who I think has been involved with this or wants to be involved with this.
But then that raises a question in my mind. If you say that in certain cases it might actually be used as a useful defense tool, that if you alter the structure of this, that's what inherently you're talking about, altering the structure, not behaviors of people. So wouldn't it become unusable also as a defense mechanism?
Exactly why I said I'm very unpopular in the state.
So, yeah.
Because I'm basically saying the way we go about this is we make this harder for everyone to do. The internet is such a beast because it's the first thing that we've had that exists everywhere and nowhere at the exact same time, right? It is in every country, but it is also in no country. And so you can't have unilateral action on regulating the internet. China is trying, but there are still, people can break in, right? People can break into their quartered off section of it, and things can still happen. And so the best way forward, I think, is again, some sort of international cooperation over this. And I think just looking at who has made the most headway basically to make this happen faster, I think the European model is the way to go. The US, we're way too, I don't say uncaring, but our ideas about privacy are not near strict enough that things like this would take forever. I think we're already seeing the beginning of it in Europe, and that's why I think if we hop on their models, take pieces that work and put them together, I think that's why the fastest way that we can try and counter this. Now, how long would that last? It's a function of the internet, how fast things go. Every day it's getting faster and faster and faster, but we have to start somewhere. And when you were saying earlier, information operation, election meddling, one of the biggest issues is no one, in 2 years, there's still not a name for what happened, right? No one knows what to call it. Some people, information operations, cyber warfare,
It's an influence campaign.
Well, exactly. But then the idea is, normally, by definition, influence campaigns typically come from militaries. It's militaries who engage in information campaigns. But then now, because we have these proxy actors, it's, well, who's engaging with it? And then we also have people in the public, right? We have like I just said, politicians do it in elections, companies do it for advertising. So it's kind of figuring out ways that it has to affect
A
everyone.
lot of information by Twitter or Facebook
exactly.
or whatever,
Exactly.
or by going on every website and giving your credit card details and your whatever, and we're all guilty of it at some level and to some degree. How do you take that into effect when you're looking at how to countermand?
So that's what I was saying. A lot of people think that information literacy is the way to go. And actually, I would counter and probably say, so we have all these ideas of information literacy and then media literacy, and I think we need to I think we need to say data literacy, right? People don't understand, and that's been one of the issues going back to at least 2010, 2012, is there have been these conspiracy theorists for the past, 10 years have been like, this is horrible, they're using our data, don't give it away, all this stuff, but no one cared, right? They were the crazies out on the fringe. Well, now we realize they weren't as crazy as we thought, right? And so over time, the more abuses there are, the more people are realizing, oh, this is actually this is true. But still, there are nearly 2 billion people on Facebook. There are, I think, 700 million-ish people on Twitter. The majority of those don't know or they don't care. Yeah. And so it comes back to, this has to be like a lifelong training or lifelong learning thing, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about media literacy, that's something people learn over time, right? As you grow up, you learn that this network leans one way, but that, you can't be, you're told it, but until you experience it, you don't understand it, right? And so there's all these ideas that we need to start training people in primary education, right? You need to start having media literacy and information literacy. How can you deem if this is probably fake or probably true? I think that's one way to go, is we literally people have to be trained and taught to understand, hey, if you want to give them away, one thing I teach a social media class, and when we do our week on metrics and analytics and data privacy, when I tell people that you have given Facebook and the US federal government your facial scan and your thumbprint just by opening your phone and doing a geofilter on Snapchat, right? That's as valuable, if not more valuable, than your social security number. Right? But no one thinks about that, right? They're like a 20-year-old who's like, oh my god, filter!
Yeah.
Sorry, I teach social media, it gets, but they don't think, right? They're a 20-year-old who doesn't have a care in the world and nothing can hurt, and it's that mentality. And so it's using examples like what we saw in the election, about seeing these other times where it gets violated and say, hey, this is what can happen when you give something that you think is completely worthless away. People can figure out how to build this into profiles that can be used against you. And again, I don't want to say used against you. I don't want to demonize it, but most of these came out of good business models. Hey, this person, if you buy this book, we want to know that most inferentially, you'll most likely buy these. We'll put them right in front of your eyes so it's easier for you to get to it. That way you can spend more money on our company and we get more money. It's a good business model, but it's being warped for other purposes. And so I think one is there's this, people have to just learn through their life. There have to be, curricula about how to do this. Some groups are American universities actually pioneering something right now. They actually built a system. It's like, I think it's for elementary school, and it literally just it throws out scenarios, and it's like, do you think this is false or true, and why? Now, fun fact: one of the article that I saw, it literally put China is thinking about creating a user credit system that's based off of all your online behavior. Well, and it's off of a Black Mirror episode, if anybody's seen that episode, where your entire credit rating is based off of how you behave in public or online. And this, I told the person, I was like, you do know that's true. China is actually attempting to do that. But then so half of it is when is the information actually false? When is it true? How can you?
Actually, so the social security number here in the United States had the same function. So you cannot get credit or buy a car or get a loan. So I understand the Chinese model is more advanced in the way, but so even here, so I think it's just how you handling the data. Because I remember, I'm Hungarian, and I remember, so we also had that kind of social security number, and after 1990, so the government, the newly elected government wanted to give separate number for your ID, your healthcare, your retirement fund, so everything. So just we carried approximately 5 different cards, just showing your identity, because they didn't want connections, right? So when I came to the States, so I was so surprised, so all of the data behind of the social security number. So this is again how the states and the government handles things. So I think, for me, it's a little bit overthinking this whole.
The one in China is looking at whether you buy alcohol or apples.
Of course, that's what I'm saying.
We don't have to track that in
Are
the
you more likely
US
to get
yet.
tongue by buying alcohol 5 nights a week?
Insurance companies do track it. All of the grocery store cards, the discount cards and stuff that you sign up for, they do sell all of that data to insurance companies
I
and
don't have a
stuff.
grocery store.
Yeah, but so
This is
that's what they Chinese model is definitely more advanced.
Yeah,
But so the model
yeah.
was here, even in the United States. But so if you have a trusted government and so a system which carries your data in a normal way, so you don't feel you are unsecured. But of course, so immediately you can see something, and you can use that argument. So okay, so someone is using my data. So of course, so it creates that fear. Even it's not from there. So this is just how I
No, and I mean you're definitely right.
comparing the two systems.
As I mentioned earlier, none of this is new, right? Propaganda's been around for centuries. A lot of these problems have been around, but it's the adoption of the internet that has made them radically different, right? Why are they all of a sudden so different than they have been before? It's because of the internet. So that's why I think targeting the infrastructure of the internet is the way to go. But yeah, it's not.
So why don't you teach your students in social media how to mess with the system? I just randomly go places. Facebook thinks I speak Finnish. I don't.
I do. Well, and so when we do our metrics analytics, there are certain ways you can try and
You
color
can
your
mess
data.
with it.
Yeah, you can.
Totally mess with it.
And one thing I show them is
You can mess with Amazon too, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
just go and look at things for a while that you have no interest in, and then it will forever advertise those things to you.
And that's where,
I'm good, I don't
at
need
least
those
most
things.
young people are they don't want to be annoyed by advertisements they don't want, right? Now that's one thing and so getting back to your thing real
I know
quick.
a lot about power wars.
Not only is it teaching this, but then the other side is giving more control over the privacy to the user. So that could be using that GDPR model and say, hey, we're going to give you can control your privacy more of how you want. That's where I was going with differential sanitized data, right? So I can be on my phone and say, I want give me all these options so you don't know exactly where I am. You're clouding that data a little bit. It's still not completely unusable for them. So again, it keeps their interest, so it keeps some of these things free. But it still gives you more control over your own privacy, your own private data.
I guess I'm still thinking of the individual that's going to say, I will let Apple know that I'm in Prague, so I only get Prague. They don't.
Yeah.
This idea that
Plus,
you want
Apple
things
knows you're in
quick,
Prague anyway because it's got GPS on it.
or Yelp, or whoever it is, the idea that you want things quick and now. So it's I may be okay filtering through 5 cities and telling them that yes, I actually am in Prague.
Well, and it takes
but
time.
there will be the individual that will be nope, you can know I'm in Prague on 14th Street.
And then
Just give me what's near me.
I just think it comes back to people have to be taught.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be simple.
It's their
But
freedom to do whatever.
That's the problem, it's difficult to train that if it's constantly changing, and so then the curriculum and knowledge would constantly be changing.
Exactly.
It's like by the time.
well, yeah, just like the example with like the system they're building. The example they were giving is like I literally watched it and I was like, you know, China's actually trying to do that. Like it's not. They were trying to use this as an example of a fake news item. I was like, well, actually, if anyone watches new, telecom news coming out of China, this is legit real. And so it's not only teaching that, but like keeping that information up to date, right? And that can be just as hard as building the system. Like, so it's the internet it's a beast. It is insane in its own right. We haven't even talked about the dark web. Like, like we're talking about all the good places on the internet. Like, if this is happening on the good place, it doesn't matter what's going on in the dark web. But I will say one thing that languages are important. I feel people in this room will appreciate that. Coding, speaking code is something that they're actually trying to instill now, talking about primary education, is that kids need to learn younger about coding. It doesn't take much any coding experience at all, just like you said, to start fiddling around with it, right? You can start changing so many things just by knowing like the absolute most basics of code. So that's an area where I want to get more involved in. I speak no computer languages, which is why I'm limited in more so. I use more like Google methods. So like, hey, here's what other people can do, but like once you know basic coding, you can really start fiddling around with what they know about you and what they think about you. For some reason, Twitter thinks I speak Romanian. I don't know how they got that. If it's one of their inferential statistic things, I'm like, I know a couple people from Romania, but like they're not even on Twitter, and it's just like, I don't know how you got this information, but whatever. So yeah, half the time, not in half, but there is plenty of information that they infer on you that's not actually accurate, right? And so what they hope is that you will eventually correct it for them, right? So like when you go and check, be like, Twitter, I never put in a gender on my Twitter, and Twitter has auto-identified me as female. I don't know why, but like they're hoping for, okay, hey, will you go update, check your settings and see if they're accurate. Well, they're wanting to say, hey, find out what we assumed wrong and fix it for us.
Brother-in-law, and we were just talking about it, and then I go into my office and I'm getting ads immediately for the bourbon that we were talking about.
So that's a big thing in the U.S.
Yeah.
One thing, if you're interested in this kind of area, it's not so much on this
You guys
area.
were just talking?
Yeah, before too.
Just talking.
She had her stuff open.
There was like
We're actually not connected.
like a bourbon a month.
So you were looking on your phone or your phone?
No,
computer?
I had looked on it like I think on my phone.
So
And we're not friends on Facebook.
that's called cross-platform tracking. So.
It's like cross-platform.
Right. But no, this is a legit thing, and I learned about it from some legal people I had in my social media class. Is there are devices that when they receive an update, so like an iOS update or whatever update, it involves, and this is a big issue for privacy in the US sense right now, is it involves, it will download so many updates, and one of them will be basically this program that sends out a subsonic frequency, right? So humans don't hear it, but it legit talks to your other devices. And so if you're watching one thing on your computer and it's sending out the signal, and yours also has the update that says, I want to receive signals, your phones are actually communicating so that your phone knows that she's looking at something. And that's actually a huge thing right now, again, in the US sector about privacy. I don't think actually they're not allowed in Europe right now because of things like the GDPR and older privacy laws in Europe. But yeah, cross-platform tracking, check it out.